Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So we're going to do our normal weekend review here for the weekend of August 11th through the 13th. And I had mistakenly thought that this summer was over. I thought it was done. I thought that the Dark Tower flopping last weekend was kind of going to be the whimper at the end of the summer here. But AnnaBelle Creation proved me wrong and really broke out this weekend. And so we'll talk about that and sort of the other top 10, and we will touch upon some movies outside of the top 10 that have opened in limited release. But let's get started. So number one this weekend, and these are the actuals. The actuals came in this afternoon. Actually, yeah, it was this afternoon. Sometimes they come in the morning, like late morning, East Coast time. But for some reason, they were pretty late today. I'm not really sure why. But in any event, number one this weekend was AnnaBelle Creation. This is I guess it's the prequel to AnnaBelle, I think. And AnnaBelle itself is a prequel to The Conjuring. Essentially what has happened is that Blumhouse and James Wan have created this Conjuring movie universe. So you have The Conjuring 1, Conjuring 2. Both are very good genre flicks. The Conjuring is one of my favorite horror movies. And that's strange to say that because it is such a genre flick. Like, it's not that artistically experimental. It doesn't really push the horror genre forward at all. But it hits the notes and the right notes so well, and has all the right elements of a horror film, and they're done in such a way that they're so polished and well curated that the end product is just a super enjoyable horror movie and terrifying. The Conjuring is one of the scariest movies. I don't even know why. It's just the atmosphere that's created by James Wan is so good. The Conjuring was a big success. The Conjuring 2 came out last year. And the year before, I guess it would have been, actually it was 2014, I believe, October, AnnaBelle came out. AnnaBelle kind of had, mixed reviews from people, I think. The Conjuring's very beloved. The Conjuring 2 did pretty well. I think critics really liked it. It was very successful. But AnnaBelle kind of had a mixed sort of message, right? So The Conjuring does 137 back in July of 2013. It feels like it came out a lot longer ago than that, but it was only 4 years ago. Conjuring 2 we had last year. AnnaBelle we had October of 2014. Conjuring 2 does 102 last summer. AnnaBelle, the original first one, does $84 million in October of 2014, just to get our numbers straight here and give some context to what's happening. And so going into this weekend, because AnnaBelle was not received as well as either of the Conjuring movies, I'm not really sure why. I really enjoyed AnnaBelle. I thought, especially the first hour of it was fantastic. The second hour gets kind of boring and kind of rote. Kind of feels like just a very typical horror movie. You could see where it was going. And the audience reaction wasn't fantastic for that one. So going into this one, there was not a ton of hype for this. They had been advertising for it for a long time. The trailer's been out for forever, it feels like. I wasn't that intrigued by it. And I didn't really think a lot of other horror fans were that intrigued by it. But something clicked here. Going into the weekend, the tracking for AnnaBelle Creation was probably, you're looking at, I think it was low 20s, mid 20s probably at the highest. And then, it comes in, the actuals came in at 35 million, just a little bit over 35 million bucks for the weekend on a tiny budget of 15 million. The per theater average was just about 10,000 per screen, which is great, especially in the weird doldrums of August. Obviously versus the tracking, it's a big win. This one came out of nowhere, I think. Kind of felt like a rogue wave here. Some rogue hype, if you will, that launched us into, it's not a stratosphere. It's not like a huge, massive breakout. And if you're looking at so it does $35 million opening weekend. we're in a really quiet August all the way until it comes out in early September. What's this thing really going to do here? Is it going to stick around? If you're looking at the other Conjuring movies, the original one had an over a 3x multiplier from its opening weekend. And that makes sense because that one opened at 41, and the movie, it was of such high quality, and the word of mouth was fantastic for it, that it had a kind of a slow burn. Ended up at 137. So definitely over that 3x multiplier, which is, for a horror film, great. Like, horror films in general tend to have lower multipliers. I don't really want to give a range, but, let's say the average movie does 2.7x its opening weekend. Horror's probably down like 2.5, 2.4-ish, and that's just sort of like a ballpark relative guess. They also have really massive drops in their second weekends. So AnnaBelle Creation is probably going to drop more than 50% next week, I would assume. Before I even get into that, what's word of mouth on this? 68% in Rotten Tomatoes. So just got over that fresh hump of the 60%. 6.2 out of 10 rating from the critics. Audience score is 78%, which isn't bad, but isn't great either. And then, so I think based on that, word of mouth is going to be decent. I believe it had a cinema score of B, which is not fantastic. That does align with that Rotten Tomatoes 73% audience score. It's sort of like it wasn't the worst one I've ever seen, but it certainly wasn't a home run, right? It's sort of kind of like decent, was the audience reaction. And with horror movies, decent, only decent, you're going to look at a pretty significant drop on its second weekend and some pretty short legs, I would say. So I would say probably at most it's going to do 3x, even though I don't, but let's just say that, use that as the top. So you're looking at 105. My guess is that it's going to go below 3. How low? I don't really know. It's not going to be like Captain America Civil War territory, or like 2.28x. Which is just horrific. It's not going to be like that. But it might play like the original AnnaBelle. So that opened at 37 and only did 84. So its multiplier was only 2.27. I didn't know it was that low. I sound like an idiot. I just go on about how bad Captain America Civil War was, and AnnaBelle actually had a worse multiplier. That's a terrible multiplier. I remember that coming out. I saw it opening weekend. I thought that did better than that. So you're looking at probably a pretty nasty low multiplier here. So if it does that, you're looking at 80. So I'm going to say probably between like 85 and 105. I'll probably just guess probably in the low 90s it'll do. I don't think it's going to do as bad as AnnaBelle. In terms of its multiplier, but I don't think it's going to hit 3x. So let's say like maybe high 80s, low 90s, which is a great take for this movie. I don't think they expected to do much more than that. It's going to run into an iceberg here when it comes out in about a month. Well, actually, technically it's less than a month now. So it has about 3 weeks, and that's it. And then it's going to take over and open to like $80 million. I don't know if that's true. I have to do the math on that. But I think it is going to be so massive. It's really going to suck the air out of everything in September, which is normally a very quiet month of the box office. It's either second or third sort of lowest of the year of all the months. You usually got like January. February is usually pretty low. With September is down there. But it's going to be massive, and I think that's going to sort of truncate any run that AnnaBelle would have here. I think it's just a pop-off opening weekend, and people were bored. Dark Tower didn't do well. The other stuff that's coming out like Kidnap, Atomic Blonde, War for Planet of the Apes, all the big stuff just didn't really seem to connect with a lot of people. And so I think people are itching to go to the theater and see something fun and interesting and forget about everything else that's going on in the world for a while. And I think AnnaBelle Creation was sort of that anecdote to the reality that's happening these days. So that was number 1 this weekend. Number 2 is Dunkirk, 10.8 million, almost 10.9. A really good 36% drop. This one has just been hanging around. It's in its 4th weekend. Opened a month ago. It's still on about 3,800 screens. This last weekend it lost 250, and it sounds like it was the same 250 that it gained last weekend. So I'm assuming that's an IMAX thing. Its per theater average this weekend was about $2,900. Total take so far for Dunkirk is $153. I've talked a lot about this movie over the last few weeks. The consensus that I have on it is that it's a good performance, especially within the context of it's Christopher Nolan. It's not a straightforward war movie at all. I saw it this weekend because I was just so curious. One of the stranger war films that I've seen. It does not have a straightforward narrative whatsoever. The funny thing about Dunkirk is I'm a big war movie fan, so I was obviously going to go see it. But if you're kind of like an art, like super into like, I don't want to call it experimental because it's not really, but it is experimental for a blockbuster without a doubt. The way Christopher Nolan uses time in this is one of the most unique things I've seen in a movie ever. I'll just put that out there. And obviously he's known for that. He did Memento, the whole backwards thing, and The Guy Keeps on Forgetting, that's one of my favorite movies, and what an amazing experience to watch that movie for the first time. Dunkirk isn't that sort of conspicuous with its time experimentation, but it has a pretty strong effect there by the end. It's almost, I guess you would call it like a braided narrative where there's three different strands, three different stories going on at the same time. And I say same time, they really are going on at the same time, but it's shown sort of out of order and out of sync. It's really something to see. I mean, even if you're not I thought the first half of the movie was kind of poorly done and was really slow. But the last probably 40 minutes and the last 20 minutes especially are amazing. And I can see why critics really fawned over it, because that last 20 minutes is some of the best war movie making I've ever seen. It's up there with like Saving Private Ryan. Those last 20 minutes are so good. But it's having great drops, really low drops, which I sort of had predicted was going to happen just because it plays older. Older people don't rush out and see movies opening weekend. They wait until they have free time or really want to go, or it's quieted down on the fourth weekend. Like when I went to go see it on like Saturday afternoon, and the place was packed, and I tried to see it the weekend before. It was actually sold out. So, and I go to like older people movie theaters because I don't want to be around teenagers. Let's be honest. They're annoying. Or children. So, that's how it's playing. It's a nice slow descent for this. And I think it can kind of like stick in the top 5 for a while. Definitely the top 10 through August. And then I think it'll quickly dissipate when we hit September and it hits that 2 month mark. So that was Dunkirk, 153 so far. That's great. Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature. This is an Open Roads film. I think that's what it is, Open Road Films, ORF. That's what it is? Yeah, Open Road Films. Who just got sold or bought or shut down. They don't exist anymore. So this one got dumped in sort of the death period of this studio. Open Road Films was like a joint venture between, I want to say AMC and another big movie, basically movie chains creating movies with the goal of sending them pretty quickly to VOD. Somewhere along the way, their business model got confused. They started to release films in the theater thinking they can make money that way. They didn't, because the movies were terrible. I'm trying to see if there's anything that they released. And it's been going on for a while now that I'm looking at it here. It's been going on since 2011. But it really didn't kick off till 2012. There's definitely some movies that you'll pick out here. The Gray was one of their first movies, which was definitely a success. End of Watch, that was also another good one with Jake Gyllenhaal. Side Effects, that was a weird one with Steve Soderbergh. That one did not do well. That was kind of a disaster on release. Not it did 32, but it just nobody wanted to see that movie. It looked terrible. The Host, that was a big one. Jobs, the first Steve Jobs movie. The original Nut Job came out in January 2014. You know, they did some really good stuff. I'm kind of full of shit on this a little bit. I would say this: the very, very hit and miss, and clearly they had no idea what they were trying to achieve. They put out Chef. That was a huge win, I think. Although Chef only did $31 million total. That seems super low to me because I don't know. Maybe it was just the people that I knew, but people would not shut up about that movie when it came out. Am I thinking about the same movie with Jon Favreau? Yeah, it's a movie. Only did $31 million. Man, I thought that probably did like $100 million. I guess it was more of an arty film than I thought. Nightcrawler, but you know, this kind of like, as I'm looking at this, it's sort of coming to me that like the Chef should have been $100 million movie. Like, sure, it was kind of small, sure, it was kind of arty, but wow, is that a crowd pleaser? Like, there's nobody who I know who's seen Chef and says, oh, that movie's amazing, I love it. Like, it was one of those movies that was just, like, perfect for that. So the fact that it only did 30, it seems like a big failure by Open Road Films. And then Nightcrawler was another disaster. I feel like that should have been, they didn't know how to lobby for Oscars or something. There's no reason like Jake Gyllenhaal did not win the Best Actor award for Nightcrawler. I don't even know what one. It was 2014. So what the hell was that? Wolf of Wall Street, maybe? I don't even remember. Jake Gyllenhaal's absolutely amazing in Nightcrawler. One of the best performances I've ever seen. Like, it reminded me of like the greats back in the 70s, like Nicholas or even like an Al Pacino or something like that. It was that good. And so Open Road Films, you know, they've been all over the place. I mean, they released stuff like, it's Spotlight, right? You know, in the same, within a month of each other, in a few weeks, they released Rock the Casbah, which is one of the worst wide openings of all time. And then they released Spotlight, which went on to win Best Picture. I mean, it's like such a bipolar studio. I just don't know what the hell they were doing. They did Snowden. But in the last year or so, it's just been a total disaster. They put out The Promise. I mean, why would you do that? I mean, that was a passion project, but like only made $80 million and it cost what, $100 million to make. It was a total disaster financially. And I think that's it for them. This is, I don't know if they have anything. Oh no, they do have more coming out. Interesting. I didn't know that. I thought this was sort of like their last hurrah. I kind of got to figure out what has happened with them now that I'm sort of bullshitting about them. Probably should have done this before I did the podcast, but you know, whatever. I don't get paid to do this. I don't know. Maybe I misread that. Maybe I'm thinking of another studio that might have gotten bought or something. I'm not really sure. Oh no, there's like a whole brand new article about it. Open Road taps Lauren Schwartz to replace Jonathan Helfgott as marketing president. I guess they're shaking up the marketing team. I had thought that they had like shut down, but I might have misread that. That is possible. I do that. Oh, there's a new CEO. Oh no. I was fucking right. God damn it. I gotta trust my instincts. Chinese conglomerate Tang Media Partners is near a deal to acquire its second big Hollywood studio. The Wall Street Journal is reporting tonight that it will acquire Open Road Films, the producer-distributor formed in 2011 by exhibition rivals Regal and AMC, which released the Oscar Best Pick winner Spotlight and the animated family film The Nut Job. That the deal that was being discussed was for $2 million. And the assumption of debt. It's terrible. AMC had a devastating second quarter this year. And they basically wanted Open Road off the books, right? And so the Chinese Tang Media Partners came in and took them off their hands. So I was right. Like, they sort of got dumped. But they're not shutting down, right? They're not shutting down. So they're still going to be around. And I don't know what they're going to do with it, though. Like, you bought it for $2 million. You assumed all the debt. I have no idea how much debt is involved in this company. It could be tens of millions of dollars, just because they've released such shitty films. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where Open Road Films is going to go. The whole point of this long meandering rant was that Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature, was opened on 4,000 screens this last weekend, which makes sense because it's AMC and Regal, so they can, they kind of get first dibs at their own theater, right? So released on 4,000 theaters, has a per theater average on opening weekend of less than $2,100 per theater, which is absolutely horrific. $8.3 million total. It's gotta be the top 50 worst wide release openings. I think it's the worst over 4,000 ever, is what somebody said on Twitter today. So just a total debacle from a studio that basically just got sold to the Chinese at a fire sale price. So not much to say about it. I don't even want to talk about it that much. It's more interesting thinking about this studio sort of transitioning over to Tang Media Partners and what's going to happen there. It's also interesting because it was a big failed experiment that AMC and Regal put together, and it's one that I've been watching for like the last year or so. I'm doing this podcast where every week a movie from Open Road Films would come out, or every few weeks, whatever. And I would look at it and I'd be like, what the hell is this? Like Max Steel. Like, what is this movie? And why are you trying to put it out? And I was so intrigued by that. I had to research, how Open Road Films was created, what they were created for. And through talking to somebody online who probably worked there and knew the people there, I got a kind of bigger portrait of what was happening. And it just sounds like really bad business decision. And really short-sighted. And it is interesting when you think about it because it is it's theater owners trying to create and start a distribution and production company, which to me seems like it should be or was illegal. Because remember back before, my film history and film business history is not great pre-1970. But back in the day, I want to say 30s and 40s, all the studios owned all the theaters, right? And then that became illegal because I think it was an antitrust violation, is what the U.S. government thought, and kind of a monopoly. And so they broke that up and basically said, no, like the studios cannot own the theaters, or there can't be exclusive or whatever. So you would think that Open Road Films would break that sort of long-term stance that the U.S. government has had. But apparently not. Maybe it was like a side thing. Maybe it was just like a slush fund. Who knows? I mean, based on the movies that they put out, it was so what's crazy is that like Spotlight came out and Nightcrawler, two of my favorite movies of the last decade, but 80% of it was just trash. So Open Road Films, I mean, unless Tang Partners wants to do anything with it, I think it's essentially done. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't know if they're just going to like buy that slate of films or something and the rights to those films and maybe just make money off the streaming rights of those older films like Spotlight, or, that's a possibility. But for all intents and purposes, this one's gone, bites the dust. And it never made sense to me why they ever did it in the first place. But it just goes to show you this is, and I got into an argument with somebody online recently the arguments on the box office nerd forums get really heated. But I basically was saying that this is the new norm, right? Smaller studios are going to start collapsing. Relativity already collapsed last year or maybe the year before. SDX is going to be in trouble. Open Road Films just collapsed. Lionsgate was looking for a buyer. Hasbro is going to buy them, but they backed out, probably because they thought the debt was probably too much. Sony was looking for a buyer. Paramount was looking for a buyer. To me, this is the new normal. Like the film industry is in, it's not really a bubble. It's just in a collapse. It's a collapse of the hierarchy that has been in place for decades. And sure, some of these companies are newer and whatever, but it's the entire structure itself that is sort of coming apart. That doesn't mean the film business is over. That's not what I'm saying. I think that when I was talking to people online, that's what they were thinking. I'm not saying it's over. I'm just saying like this business is going to go through some horrific's not the word, catastrophic change. And more than a few studios are going to go out of business. Like that's just the reality. Is a major going to go out of business? I feel like Sony has a possibility of getting sold and shut down. They have 3 movies in the top 10 right now. Sorry, 2. That's a major studio. I feel like they're on the chopping block. And it's sort of like, a lot of this comes down to people just assuming that everything is going to stay the way it was before. And like, there's always a Cassandra complex with the movies and other entertainment like TV, cable, that kind of stuff. The movie business is always falling apart, and that's what people will say. But I think this is different. This is a different situation. It's not that the movie business is falling apart, is that it's becoming something new. And in that process of transitioning to a new type of business and a new business model, a lot of these weaker studios are going to get shut down. And rightly so, because they don't make good products and they're not successful, so they need to get shut down. And I'm not going to shed a tear over it. I'm not. Do I care? Open Roads Films, is gone now? No, they put out shitty films. Am I going to care if Sony goes out of business? At least their pictures part, or it gets sold and shut down, or just sold to somebody who will gut it? No. I mean, they haven't put out great films, and they haven't put out good products. They put out a terrible reboot of Ghostbusters, and I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but if you don't put out great products, this is a business at the end of the day. It's not about art, right? Art films and that whole world is not what the box office is about. It's just not. Every once in a while, those two worlds cross over, right? But at the end of the day, mass appeal, wide release films are products. And like, if you're not making good products, people aren't going to go see them. You're not going to stick around. You're going to go away. And Sony's been having that problem for years now. Paramount, I think, is even worse. And who knows? Maybe those bigger studios are going to go away. But that was sort of a long way of saying the business is in flux right now. And that's why Nutjob 2 Nutty by Nature only opened to 8.3 million on 4,000 screens its opening weekend, with the worst ever worst ever opening for a theater in over 4,000 theaters. That was number 3, folks. Let's get to number 4. It's going to be a supersized episode, I could feel. Number 4 was The Dark Tower, 7.8 million. Speaking of Sony, 59% drop. Terrible drop for a wide release, huge movie like this. Per theater average is pretty close to the Mendoza line, about $2,300, actually less, $2,266 to be exact. Total take so far is $34 million in the second weekend. That is absolute trash. Massive flop that is only saved by the fact that its production budget was $60 million. I'm sure its marketing budget was at least $60 million in the United States alone, or sorry, domestically, so US and Canada. Huge flop for Sony. Total disaster. Total creative disaster. Total financial disaster. I see them losing quite a lot of money on this now that I'm looking at it with that drop. If it had played, a little bit better and had, like a 50% drop, maybe mid 40s, maybe people connected with it via word of mouth or whatever, that's not happening. Like, this was a fanboy film that had a fanboy audience. They went to go see it, and nobody else wants to see it because it's a shitty film. Number 5 was Girls Trip. Doing great. Nice 43% drop for the rated R comedy. 6.5 million on the weekend. Per theater average is at 2,800 in its fourth weekend. Wonderful. It's only a $19 million budget. It will break $100 million probably tomorrow, or actually probably broke it today on Monday, but definitely tomorrow with discounted tickets on Tuesday. Just fantastic. I think one of the bigger stories of the summer is Girls Trip. I've talked about it a ton, but the short and the long of it is it's a big deal because of that low production budget. It's a rated R comedy that broke out. There's only been 2 in the last. It's like 2 out of like 15. No, it's like 2 out of like 30. There's been like 30 rated R comedies over the last 3 years, and maybe 2 to 3 have broken out and broken that $100 million mark. So it's a big story because of that, but I think it's an even bigger story because it's a movie that features African American women as the stars, and it's like a group ensemble African American female driven movie. That's a big deal. And not a big deal because like culture of the United States, we're in a really weird, fucked up spot right now. It's a big deal within the business, right? Because now the movie studios said, hey, this was successful. They only gave it a $19 million budget, and they opened it somewhat as a limited wide release. So they were hedging their bets on it. They were probably thinking, all right, we're going to get African-American women to go see this. Once they see it, the audience is going to dry up, and we're going to, it's going to make like $30 million, $40 million total. And that would be a big win for them. Well, it broke out, right? And a lot more people are seeing it than they thought were going to see it. So that's a big deal for the industry because I think it's going to give more opportunities for female-driven African-American females to play leads, and maybe even a little bit different because that was always the case. Like in the last 20 years, where you think like Halle Berry in Monsters Ball, where these sort of breakthrough performances, woke up Hollywood that said basically to be like, hey, like we can put African American women at the center of these movies, and it's gonna work. Now I think they're getting the message that like that old way of looking at African American audience as a niche audience is over. And I point to not only Girls Trip but Medea last Halloween, because if you looked at the demographics of who is going to see that movie, and I haven't seen the demos on Girls Trip, but I can guarantee you it's much bigger than the African American community in the United States, which is like 13% of the population. I guarantee you these two movies, in order to make the money that they're making, are breaking out of that niche. And I think that's going to lead to a lot more opportunities, right? So that's also why it's a big story. So I think Girls Trip is definitely one we're going to keep watching. It's a big deal, that, and I think Wonder Woman, both female-centric films are the big stories this summer. Number 6 was the Emoji movie, 6.4 million. I don't want to talk about this. 46% drop, 2,000 per theater. How does the Emoji movie make $63 million? I mean, it's one of the most panned movies of the last year. Nobody liked it. No critics liked it. No audience people liked it. I don't know who's going to see it. I guess people are bored or something. In any event, another huge Sony. I mean, the thing about this one is Sony's not going to lose a ton of money on it. It'll probably break even or maybe a little bit of a profit. But I mean, it's just like a moral loss, if you will. Like nobody feels good when they see the Emoji movie. Number 7 was Spider-Man Homecoming, which is having insanely low drops in its later weeks. It blew past the big question when it opened, and then with that first second weekend drop was, is this thing gonna make $300 million? That was the big story. I said no, and I was wrong. I thought it was gonna play more like Ultron, more like the big MCU films, but it didn't. It's having some weird Wonder Woman-esque late legs, which I did not see coming at all. It dropped 32% this weekend in its 6th weekend. It just doesn't make any sense. Very abnormal and atypical for a movie like this. So it's having a nice, steady, slow descent on its last, into its 2nd month now. Lost 500 screens. Per theater average was a decently healthy 2,300 in the 6th weekend. It's well over $306 million. I think it's going to hit the I forget what the marker was, 2.7 million or 2.7x. I think it's going to go past that. So that's very surprising. Yeah, I mean, I rambled on a lot about Spider-Man and how it was like a canary in the coal mine, and I think I was wrong in that. Fortune just had a great article today about how comic book movies played so well this summer and nothing else did. That's not entirely true. Baby Driver is a good example of that. Even like The Big Sick, what I think underperformed from a wide release perspective, but did very well for an art film. There are definitely exceptions to that, but there is a point to be made. Like Guardians did really well. Wonder Woman really surprised everybody and won the summer. And Spider-Man is slowly, like, it tripped and fell its first couple of weekends, I feel like, but now it's regained its balance and is sort of like raking in some later money here. Comic book movies really they won the summer, fair and square, and they don't look like they're losing any power anytime soon. And the Justice League stuff, I mean, I just saw the trailer when I went to go see Dunkirk, and I was like, I couldn't get through the trailer. It was ridiculous. But I could see that it's going to be a massive film. It just feels massive. So Spider-Man's sort of keeping it real there with $6 million this weekend. Number 8 was Kidnapped, the strange independent thriller with Halle Berry, who's trying to make a good comeback here. She's in another film. Oh man, what movie was that? I can't remember. It wasn't Blade Runner, was it? No, she's not in Blade Runner. She's in some trailer, but she's kind of making a career comeback. Is the point I'm trying to make. Somehow makes $5 million this weekend. This weird independent thriller that I think was completed 2 years ago. 49% drop. An okay $2,100 per theater average. Total take so far for Kidnap is $19 million. Just super surprising because this felt like a VOD film, just like 47 meters. And I probably sound like a broken record on this podcast because I do bring up a lot of the same stories over and over again, but I think that they're always interesting to follow. There's different narrative strands happening with the box office. And what I try to do is sort of pull at those strands and sort of hit them every week. And the narrative strand that I'm getting with the Kidnapped and 37 meters, is it 37 or 57? 47 meters down. I was wrong on both accounts. Is that there's something weird going on with independent distribution, independent production. And the point of those two movies is that you can make a movie outside of the art house sort of circuit and outside of the major studio circuit. In this case, a thriller. 47 meters down is kind of also a thriller. These are movies that would have been straight to DVD, straight to VHS back in my day, straight to VOD today, but they skipped that process and got into theaters and are making real money. Like $19 million in the second weekend for a movie like this is pretty outrageous. So we'll see how that one goes, and we'll see if that becomes more of a pattern, like more independent thrillers and action movies coming out. I don't know. It feels too much of a coincidence for both Kidnap to do pretty well and 47 meters to do really well. So I think maybe there's just an appetite for seeing those movies in the theaters that you wouldn't get with like other art house films. So, speaking of art house films, Lionsgate, which tried to sell itself to Hasbro, but failed for whatever reason. Hasbro didn't want them. Released the Glass Castle this weekend. 4.6 million, almost 4.7 million. Kind of a weird limited wide release, only on about 1,500 screens. Per theater average was an okay $3,200. This one was just a mystery to me. It doesn't make any sense why they released this in August. Maybe the thought process was that it's a pretty quiet time of the year, and maybe thought that they could capture, I don't know, bored people to go see this. Glass Castle is a massive, massive book in the last few years. I don't remember where it came out, but like it seemed like 2 years ago, every single person I knew was reading it. This was supposed to be, Woody Harrelson, Brie Larson, really cool trailer. Seemed very arty, seemed very much like Oscar bait. So it didn't make any sense to release in August. Also, Wind River got released now. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if these companies don't know what they're doing, or they're just not thinking through it, or obviously there's all these other factors that they have on their plate that I don't know of as to why they're releasing it now. I just don't understand. Like Glass Castle to me is an October release. You get it outside of the Oscar period where it's so competitive and there's no oxygen at the Cineplex, especially with the new Star Wars coming out. It's like, there's certainly counter programming that can work in those slots. Art house films don't, right? So I would put this out. It had a very much an October feel to it, almost like Gone Girl, Social Network. It looks like a David Fincher film almost. Critics sort of thought it was okay, 48% in Rotten Tomatoes. Audience sort of liked it, 76%. I'm just assuming that, well over half this audience is sort of people who have read the book. So it's going to be super front-loaded is my guess. And because it's not some sort of masterpiece, I don't see it really going anywhere. I'm thinking at least, probably about a 50% drop for an art movie like this. That's terrible. I don't, it doesn't make any sense why they're releasing it now. Just a total mystery to me. But, who knows? I don't know if it's going to come back around for Oscars or not. I don't think that it will. It doesn't seem like it's good enough. Although I hear the acting with Brie Larson and Woody Harrelson is great. And you can tell it from the trailer. But, it just seems really off that they're putting it out in August. I don't know if Lionsgate is just maybe dropping it or dumping it in August because they knew that it wasn't good enough to really compete for the big Oscars like Best Picture, Best Director. So they probably just said, fuck it. So number 10 this weekend was Atomic Blonde. Focus Features, 4.5 million. Okay, 45% drop. Lost a ton of theaters in its third week. 1,200 theater loss. Per theater average was about $2,100. Total take so far for Atomic Blonde was $42 million on a $30 million budget. The sort of final word on Atomic Blonde, I think, is that if you put it in the context of what it was getting released when it did get released, it's kind of an okay performance, maybe even better than expected. But if you take a big sort of step back and be like, why are you putting this out in July, late July? This also doesn't really seem like a summer movie to me. And $30 million budget isn't huge, but I think, you're going to want to make at least 60, 90 million on this thing. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think a good victory for this would have been 100 million. Now that's sort of like removed from the context of when it was released. If I had this on my desk as like a film executive, so $30 million and the marketing spend, I'm like, we got to make at least 100 million on this domestically to really make it, a big win and a profit center. That's not going to happen. And so something, I really think the release date hurt a lot. The quality of the film seemed fine. It's director from John Wick. It looked like John Wick with a woman. So I don't know. I don't know what happened there and why they decided to push that one out when they did. Maybe it was the same sort of concept with Glass Castle. They felt like it was a little quieter later this summer. But I don't think it really worked out that well for them. It's not a flop, but it's definitely an underperformance from what they wanted. That's the top 10. I mean, there's a couple of movies I want to talk about outside the top 10. I think Detroit, in its second week wide release, dropped 60%, which is just not what you want at this level. There's just you can't drop 60% like this. This is supposed to be an art film. I saw it. I thought it was actually very, not super poor, but not well put together. Still on 3,000 theaters somehow. How is this on 3,000 theaters? 3,000 theaters, you should be in the top 5 of the year. Of the weekend. You should be in the top 5. And it's at 13. Its per theater average was $960. It's sub 1,000 on its second week of wide release. That is, I don't know. It just, when the trailer dropped, I thought it was a mass release film. It had a little bit of an indie look to it. But it kind of felt big enough, and the director seemed big enough that I thought that it was going to be a wide release film. Now, after seeing it, it's definitely not. It's definitely an artier film. But like I was saying last week, it sort of straddles the line between art film and mass release film, and it doesn't know what it is. And that's a huge distinction. An art film isn't meant for everybody. It's meant for a small group of people that are people who enjoy cinema and people who go to be challenged. They want to be challenged when they go see an art film. That's why I go see art films. I don't go see art films to feel good. I go see art films to challenge myself, challenge how I feel about the world, challenge how I feel about art and movies and a lot of things. That's not why I go see Step Brothers or Wedding Crashers. I love that I'm exclusively naming mid-night or mid-2000s rated R comedies or old school. Those are entertainment, right? They're not necessarily meant to provoke you anyway. They're meant to make you laugh. And Detroit, I thought, was going to be one of those sort of broad, holistic, historical dramas that really pulled you in to that era and kind of almost like educational. Right, that would be sort of a big, wide, mass appeal release, like a big drama like that. It had this weird sort of, it felt like a play in the middle of the movie where you're on kind of one set in this hotel, the Algiers Hotel or motel. And it felt very claustrophobic. It felt very play-esque. The way it was shot felt like they were shooting a play. Kind of just like in the round almost. It was very claustrophobic. It just was not something you would have ever seen in a wide release sort of historical drama. It was just way too arty for that. And I think, Catherine Bigelow made a mistake trying to have her one foot in the broad historical world, trying to win a big audience, a mass appeal audience, and another foot in this very arty where I think she wanted to be authentic and raw with the film, and it just doesn't work. It comes across as very jumbled, and audiences have openly rejected this film, just completely rejected it. I went to go see it its first weekend in wide release here in Tennessee, and it was a big crowd. It wasn't a small crowd, but at the same time, it's just, outside of that group of people and that small group of people went to go see it, like no one else is going to see this. I think the only people who are going to go see it are art film people, or people who are very interested in that time period and maybe have a personal connection to the narrative that really happened. But I think it's just, I don't know, just a really strange movie. Another strange one to put out in August. What are these guys? Detroit feels definitely like a fall winter film. I just don't see why they thought it would be great to push out in August. Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that was number 13 this weekend, with a terrible 60% drop and a sub 1,000 per theater average on over 3,000 screens. You don't see that very often, where it's something still on 3,000 screens and goes sub 1,000. Baby Driver is still sticking around there, across the $100 million mark, which is a big deal. Wonder Woman is at 402 now. I wonder if it's gonna hit 4x. I think that would be, I want to say 412 million, I think, off the top of my head. I think the biggest story of the summer is Wonder Woman. I hate to admit that because I'm not over the moon about comic book movies, but that's the biggest story. I mean, the fact that it just stuck around the way it did, and maybe that's like evidence that the summer was really quiet, where this sort of early June movie broke out and just wouldn't go away. I don't mean that in a negative way. It just wouldn't go. People just kept going to see it. They kept wanting to see it. And it has a 37% drop in its 11th weekend. And it's still in the top 15 in the summer of all times. I mean, that's outrageous. And obviously it's the story, right? That girl strip, girl power. That was a really unenthusiastic girl power. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. A little bit under the weather, I think. Anything else to talk about? I think the only other movies that I want to talk about, and I will try and not be long-winded here, but I might go into a long-winded rant. The two movies I want to talk about are Ingrid Goes West and Good Time. Both very, very arty, very, very indie films that got released on limited release this weekend. I want to talk more about limited releases because I think I always have a hard time wrapping my head around their performance. I can never really tell, what's great, what's a great per theater average. It's just like a very different sort of art form analyzing those movies. But I think I'm getting better at it. So I'm gonna dive into some of these movies from now on, especially as we get into the fall and start talking about Oscar movies and maybe trying to figure out how they're gonna do. Trying to figure out how they're going to do from limited to wide is a really fascinating thing for me. I talked a lot about that with The Big Sick and how it did really, really fantastic on its limited release performance, but then kind of face planted on its wide release. Speaking of which, again, like I thought it was going to do, great drop, 33% drop. Still in wide, lost 300 theaters. It's sitting at $36 million so far. Not a massive wide release flop, just a movie that I thought could have broken out maybe, or was expected to break out by Amazon. It wasn't a super arty film that was going for Oscars. It was definitely a mass appeal sort of rom-com dramedy that I think Amazon Studios bought thinking that they could get it to really break out and do 60, 70, 80 million. That's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because it just didn't work as a wide release film. And not that they marketed it that way. It was like $30 million marketing. They bought it for $12 million. Their total costs are outrageous, probably not over $50 million bucks. But they're not going to get a lot of that back with the theatrical. They're probably going to make $20 million in revenue from this box office run. And so I'm interested in how those films do and why they get marketed the way they do and why they get released the way they do. And is there still a marketplace for those more independent films? Big Sick was one that sort of straddled the line a little bit. It was mass appeal enough that they put up $30 million bucks to market it on a wide release. Now, it didn't work out very well, but it definitely had the potential for that. There wasn't a mistake in terms of that. I think they were right on the money. It was one of the best romantic comedies I've seen in 10 years. It's a really good film and really just like funny and interesting and emotionally full of depth. Was it perfect? No, I'd give it like a low 82 out of 100 maybe. But it had the potential to really connect with a wide audience, I think. Two movies that probably don't are Ingrid Goes West and Good Time. Both independent releases. Ingrid Goes West is a really fascinating movie that stars Aubrey Plaza and Elizabeth Olsen, and it reminds me a lot of Spring Breakers, which is a movie that came out in 2013, I believe. Harmony Korine, an A24 release. I think they're one of their first, or might have been their first. Totally crazy film that I think, when I first saw it, I was like, what is this? I know him. I didn't really want to see any of his films. I don't really like a lot of his films. They're really edgy, but like edgy, edgy to be edgy to the point where it's just like really annoying. But Spring Breakers, after I saw it once, I was like, eh. When I saw it again, I was like, no, there's something here. There's something deep here. And I've probably watched it like 10 times since then. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. I think it's honestly a masterpiece. Maybe an unintended masterpiece on some level, but I think it was conscious, and I think he knew what he was doing. But Ingrid Goes West has that same very neon-soaked feel to it. Just everything seems like it is at a rave where it's like those candy kids, like the kids where they're not even kids, they're teenagers and older, but like they got like neon on, and it's just like every colors are popping out at you, and it has that sort of color vibe to it. The movie itself is a very, very sort of dark, dry, I guess you could call it a comedy, but like a comedy like Heathers would be a comedy. It's super, super pitch black. I'm sure that it's funny, but it's like really dark humor. And Aubrey Plaza is obviously perfect for that type of role. But it opened up this weekend, only in 3 theaters, so I'm thinking maybe just Los Angeles. Maybe just to get it in the Oscar running, maybe. But $45,000 per theater, which is not bad. But as I'm getting my sea legs with limited releases, it's not great. I would want something like this if I thought it was going to break out or wanted to do well. The whole point of releasing one of these films, I would hope for well over $50K. And the same thing goes for Good Time, which is Robert Patterson. Robert Patterson, is that his actual name? I always think that's like the author. No, that's right. Robert Pattinson. I always thought it was Patterson. It's Pattinson. I'm an idiot. In any event, A24, so the people put out Spring Breakers, they put out Good Time, looks fantastic. I mean, one of my favorite trailers I've seen in the last few years. Really good trailer. Seems really interesting. Jennifer Jason Leigh is also in it. This kind of has that hard R indie feel to it, where it's kind of like crime related. Maybe kind of reminds me of Place Beyond the Pines. Seems really evocative. That opened at $31,000 on 4 screens. I'm sorry, $31,000 per screen or per theater on 4 theaters. It ended up about $125,000 this weekend. And I wanted to mention both these films just because I think that they're interesting and I want to talk about limited releases more. But also, it sort of reminds me that the landscape for films like this is just really tough. When I saw Ingrid Goes West, like the trailers and stuff like that, I was like, wow, this looks really good. This looks like something that I would love to see as a film nerd, as someone who's interested in dark comedies and interested how far people will push certain narratives and concepts. I wanted to be challenged. Like I was saying before, art films are about challenging people, and it seems like a challenging film. The fact that they're putting it now in August and like, what's this thing gonna do? It's going nowhere. I could bet you my car that Ingrid Goes West is gonna collapse if it goes anywhere above like 100 theaters. And so 45K, people are saying, oh, that's really good. Deadline said, hey, that's a great start. Yeah, who cares? Like, open, sure, 3 theaters in Los Angeles and New York, that doesn't mean anything. That's the only place this movie is going to play well. I just don't see it breaking out at all. Maybe Elizabeth Olsen will bring people in. Audrey Plaza is not a pull, really. And, let's be honest, Elizabeth Olsen isn't really either. But it just it just goes to show you that if I'm making this film or distributing this film, and maybe I made it and I want to get it out to as many people as I want, as I can, I do wonder what the point of releasing it in the theater is, right? Because if my goal as a feature filmmaker, producer, or whatever, if you want people to see your work, don't put it out in art theaters like this. Like, this is not gonna go anywhere. People aren't gonna pay $15 to go see Ingrid Goes West. Not millions of people, I'll tell you that much. So it doesn't make any sense financially, really, to release it in a theater because there's not enough people who are going to see it that's worth marketing or spending all that money in marketing. Then you look at the other side of things, it's like, well, okay, like if you want to be in an awards contention for the Oscars, you do have to release your movie during this calendar year in Los Angeles County. So that's just the rule. You just have to do it. So maybe they're just going to release it for a little bit and get that awards contention, and maybe build up buzz that way so more people will see it or buy it on VOD or whatever. That also doesn't really seem like a plan here because it doesn't really seem like an Oscar type movie. It seems more like a cult classic. So to me, this really puts into question the releasing strategy. I don't mean to pick on Ingrid Goes West, but like of all art films, if the goal is to create challenging art and get it out to as many people as possible, and there's no real financial ulterior motive there, then why would you release it in a theater? Like, there's no reason to see this movie in the theater. If it was on Netflix or Amazon Prime, or some other service, I would sit down and watch it. There's no way I'm going to get this on VOD. It's like $6. I'm not going to spend $6 on it. There's no way I'm going to go to an art theater, even if it does play around here. Like the one from near me is Belcourt. Get in your car, drive 20 minutes, pay $15. There's no way I'm going to do that. So there's a ton of people like that who just aren't going to put the time and money to go see something in the theater because it just takes a lot. So I wonder what, why? Why wouldn't you just put this out on streaming and get people to see it? Maybe there's not a financial incentive to do that. Maybe they think it's going to get lost on Netflix. I've heard that before. I've heard independent people say that like they'll put it on streaming and like Netflix doesn't put it anywhere you can find it. It's like if it was a Blockbuster, they put it like in the back section or the porn section or something. Although Blockbuster didn't sell porn, but you know what I mean. It's sort of lost in the shuffle. I could see that. What I'm sort of sensing is there needs to be an alternative, either part of Netflix or an alternative streaming service that really features movies like Ingrid Goes West and Good Time. Good Time looks like kind of like Oscar-esque material. It looks really good. There's no audience for it in August. I'm telling you that right now. Look, it's got a $31,000 average in New York and Los Angeles right now. There's no audience for it. None. The audience is like me and like 20,000 other people who would go see it in the theater. I might actually go see that in the theater. I kind of want to see a little bit more than Ingrid Goes West. But again, if there was a service that maybe it's not Netflix, maybe it's something special, maybe it's just for like independent films that are really good, or just curated independent films that was streaming, that was like, I don't know, $10 a month or something like that. I would see it. I would pay to watch this movie, both these movies right now. I would be super stoked to see them right now. But I'm not going to, because there's no distribution path that makes sense for these films anymore. And I think that's one of the ways that the movie industry is really kind of in upheaval. Okay, that's my whole shtick on that. I was just looking at the list here. Remember Ghost Story, the A24 movie that came out? Total take 1.4 million total. I knew that was going to happen. It's another perfect example of a film that I want to see that's not really playing near me anywhere. And I live in somewhat of a major city, probably like top 50 in the United States, probably top 30. There's definitely art house theaters and bigger multiplexes that play art house films. And maybe I just missed it. Maybe it was here and I didn't see it. The thing is, I have a desire to see that. I have a set threshold of money that I will spend to go see a movie. That doesn't mean it just because I know that it won't be that much different of an experience watching it on my laptop or watching it on my TV, right? So if they could bundle Good Time, Ingrid Goes West, and A Ghost Story, like really high-end, well-done independent films into a streaming service, I kind of feel like it should be outside Netflix. I love Netflix. Who doesn't love Netflix? But Netflix is an absolutely fucking mess right now. And it has been for the last 5 years. They just have not taken the time to make their UX and customer experience make any sense. The content is all over the place. It is not mislabeled, but it's misorganized. It doesn't make any sense. It really lessens the impacts of those films. It's like going on and picking a film on Netflix doesn't have the same feel of going to see a movie. It doesn't have the same feel of going to the Blockbuster like I did as a child and through my teenage years and even more, and picking out a movie. Like, it doesn't have that sort of heightened experience to it. And in many ways, it lessens the experience of watching a film and kind of cheapens this great art and these great products that are out there that are entertaining. It makes them feel a lot less than they actually are. And so I don't know, that's my whole shtick about limited releases right now, is there needs to be a different service out there that's outside the theater. I think it's outside Amazon Prime or Netflix, just because they don't know how to handle independent films. Another perfect example, Landline has only made $700K in the theater, right? And they pushed it out to 137 theaters. No one's seen this movie. I want to see it. I think Jenny Slate's amazing. But again, is it on Netflix? If it's on Netflix, no one's also going to see it, because it is going to get lost in the pile of films because they don't know how to organize their content. I just feel like there might be another service out there that could get those films and get them to people who want to see them, and just skip the theater. Skip the art house theater. There's no reason for it to be there. Anyways, there's my rant. The show's going a little bit long, but who gives a shit? Let's talk a little bit about what's going to go on the next couple of weeks. Hitman, it's kind of a big weekend this weekend. Lucky Logan, Hitman's Bodyguard. I'm probably going to see Lucky Logan because I love Soderbergh. It looks really fun. It's coming out. Hitman's Bodyguard, reviews are not great on it. I think it sits at 48% now on Rotten Tomatoes. I wonder how many reviews. Only 13 reviews, so that doesn't even really count. I think it might break out. It feels like a mid-90s Lethal Weapon type movie. You know, it's like a kind of fun action movie. I think that might break out a bit, and I think Lucky Logan will do okay. Then it's really quiet, really nothing going on August 25th. Or the first, I guess that's Labor Day. Oh, Good Time is actually going nationwide, so we'll have a good sort of data sample to see how well it does on August 25th. Like the worst weekend ever for the box office. I mean, come on, it's such a bad idea. It's all quiet until it comes out on September 8th after this weekend. So maybe you know, summer's continuing on here, and maybe another last hurrah. And then we get into the fall season, which is probably my favorite season. Fall through holidays is just like the best. So much fun. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildland Podcast. I will be back next week. Take care.